Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well, and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtable, where we assemble some of the members of the Coaches Panel, the AFL Fantasy community contributors, and we talk about all the big issues that could be, should be, and need to be unpacked as you head into another week of AFL Fantasy. On this episode, we're going to talk about rucks. I got a ton of statistical questions I've got to ask our special guest on this episode, and a bunch of different players that I feel like are right on the cusp of defining seasons as we get to the interesting halfway mark of the year. It is a bumper AFL strategy roundtable, and we are so glad to have you a part of it. If you're watching this video on YouTube, and if you're not, go and subscribe. Check it out. There's videos dropping there all the time. But if you are, you already know who the guest is. So if you like to get in early and find things out ahead, we got you covered with that. But right out of the gate, joining us after a successful, not really a debut, because he's been part of the Coaches Panel podcast in the preseason on the 50 Most Relevant, done a power of great statistical work for the community for years now. We thought we've got to get Jaiden's wisdom, not just in the super coach space where we had him last week, but in the AFL fantasy space. Jaiden, nice to have you back on the podcast, mate.
Thanks, MJ. Yeah, it's a great intro. I'm pretty keen to talk about some of the stuff tonight, and I think we can, continue to, break down some of these players and why they're scoring, how they're scoring, things like that.
Yeah, no, you've brought some great language and understanding to the world of Supercoach last week, and I think you're going to do that for the AFL fantasy community as well. Also on this podcast, he's not just been a regular part of the Coaches Panel, but since his inception, but politely was the main driver behind it. His fellow co-founder, he, like me, has a fake name. Rids, hello, mate. How are you?
I thought you were going to introduce me in saying I've been bringing language to the Coaches Panel for the best part of the last decade.
I hope not. No, because then I have to edit the podcast. So don't do that to me. No, it's nice to have you on. We want to talk rucks in a half second, but Rids, it does feel like it's we've said it maybe the last couple of weeks now, but this does feel like an interesting pivot week yet again with Elliot Yeo, where we moved off him a few weeks ago. It created some uniqueness of strategy and players and ways we traded as we are knocking on the door of the next batch of best 18s and buys. It feels like we are yet again at another interesting junction point of the season, doesn't it?
It's a crazy little year, this one, isn't it? Like, we've got premiums scoring like rookies. We've got rookies scoring like premiums. We got rookies getting vests. We got everything happening this year. We got carnage. We got people rolling their ankles in the first minute of the game. It's just, we got Darcy Parish having a calf injury. That's not so much unsurprising, but the timing of it and the interesting way that the AF app works at times means editing that trade when that news broke may or may not have contributed to people's successes last week or failures, for instance. What a crazy year. And guess what, MJ? We're not even halfway through it yet.
Not even halfway. There's a ton of stuff we've got to get through, but maybe right out of the gate, the ruck line has been a fascinating conversation. I think if we all were to go back in time 12 weeks ago, the community decision rightfully should have been Gawn and Cherry in a bunch of different areas. You could have argued some other components of whether Grundy was there. Do you do the three-headed monster in the rucks? Sure. But now we find ourselves in this interesting spot where you could argue that the top two spots in our ruck could be filled by any of the top three at the moment. And I'm alluding to English, Marshall, Gawn. Grundy's maybe a touch unlucky, but I'm happy to discount him for the moment at the very least. Rids, lots of the community own Gawn. Lots of the community are looking to jump off Cherry at some point over the next 5 weeks, whether it be this week before the bye or after the mid-season buys have all rolled alongside. But all three of these guys have given us interesting stretches of time. English has had some quiet patches, and then he's had a 4 or 5 week stretch which was back to 2023. Marshall just 5 weeks ago was delivering us scores that weren't even cash cow territory, and he's pretty much gone 330 points in the past fortnight, and Max Gawn, after being unstoppable for the first 7 weeks, has not been bad the past 3 weeks, but a little bit quiet based on his lofty standards. What does this ruck line look for us? How do we rank and position trading into and out of these guys? Because barring something drastically changing, it does feel like 2 of these 3 we're going to want to own, not just for the rest of the season, but relatively soon.
Well, I think majority of people who own Gawn right now pretty much had him from day one. So I think that's a fair assumption.
Correct.
And I think the problem is now you don't want to really trade into Gawn due to how highly ranked, like he's highly owned in the high rankings of AF right now. So that's going to make it a little bit tricky. Marshall, he's like, I feel for the owners that traded Marshall a few weeks ago when he had that knee knock. Like, I really do feel for them. But the fact of the matter is,
made sense.
Well, it did make sense. Yeah, it made sense at the time. But often we get, let's say, duped. We just, whoever we trade, and we'll have a big discussion about this later next week or wherever it is. But in this asset,
sure,
I jumped on Marshall 2 weeks ago as a point of difference to English when groupthink was all on English. Same buy, same scoring potential. Both are going to be like, I think it's a common perception across the community, a top 2 ruck or close enough to. So I just didn't think spending more money for the same guy, in essence, was smart. But I never thought he was going to go 160, 170 back to back, bang, bang. And those sort of moments in time, okay, they change those rankings, mate. Like, really, like they impact the whole year. Because, like, we're talking about English, who was near at 1 million, and everyone was rightfully thinking at that point in time a couple of weeks ago, he's going to be more than 1 million in a couple of weeks if he keeps going at these trends.
Yeah, cheap as he could get.
And Marshall was on the downslide after that knee knock 70, looking like he may or may not have a rest. We've even got the coach as early as last week before the game saying, oh, yeah, Marshall's is probably taking too much of the load in there. We probably should offload him some of those loads. And then he comes out and goes 170. And really, let's be honest, he was a premium mid, yeah? He's a number 1 premium mid right now.
Oh, yeah.
He should be ruck mid.
With that scoring, yeah.
Like 30 disposals. He had multiple tackles. Even if you took away that 39 hitouts, he's still going at 130 something last week. Like, it's just ridiculous, some of these numbers. And you can't predict that, yeah? Otherwise, we would have all been jumping on Marshall 2 weeks ago. And people would definitely have not traded him out. But, I mean, who?
No, not at all.
Let's have a look at the other flip, mate. Jordan Sweet. He gets that opportunity to be number 1 ruck. He gets COVID. He then, I don't know, rightfully, wrongfully, who cares, last week was faded, ignored by the coaching staff. So Lloyd Mead can go in and, I don't know, manhandle a young kid plying his trade, trying to learn his thing.
Dismantled.
Well, whatever it was, in that first half, I've never seen a ruckman ragdoll another ruckman. 2 grown men ragdoll like that in the first half last week. So anyone who's on Sweet, there is a possibility, and I would say a strong possibility that he's going to be back this week. But
very high. All you've done, just so you know, Rids, for the past 4 minutes is trigger warning every person that traded into Sweet via Marshall over the past 4 minutes. That's all that they're just shuddering as they're listening to it.
But you got to feel for them, yeah?
But
you just got to feel for them. But the discussion now...
they feel for it, don't you worry.
And I know you're one, MJ, so it's okay.
I am one of them, yes.
But that's good that people know that this was a viable... Like, I mean, how many times we say it? You've got to make sound decisions. The
logic was right.
Yeah, and you got to use that sound logic and sound reasoning when you're making those decisions when it comes to trading. And I mean, you've been playing for the better part of 15 years. You definitely applied sound logic. We know, superstar coaches, goats, the new age goats, like even Mini Monk, like potentially was going down that, like this fooled everyone. So if you were on the bad end of it, you just got to, move on, but you got to not be stubborn. Marshall is going to be a problem moving forward if you're not owning him at some stage or planning to get him. That's the discussion now. So if we've gone flip side, MJ, so I'm going to throw it over to you and Jaiden right now, and I'm going to shut up, okay? But the two rucks that we all want in our completed team as of now, I think we all in agreement. There's three great viable options there in Gawn, Marshall, and English. But guess what? I think it's actually Marshall and one off Gawn or English at this point in time. That's how incredible this has flipped, yeah?
Yeah, it's over a period of 3 weeks, it's gone completely different. So, Jaiden, let's talk for people that own Gawn for a second, because those that don't own him, I think Rids has a fairly good summation that they're probably not going to trade into him because they're gaining nothing by doing it until he goes potentially again on a Marshall-esque sort of tear. So talk to me about a Tim English in that space, because he's seen some volatility in his scoring this year, certainly much more compared to last year. One of the things you brought brilliantly to the table for a number of years, but really to the fore in 2024, is an understanding of how players are scoring, where they are scoring, and what that means for the decisions and selections we should make. So talk to me for non-Gawn owners, how they should be approaching a Tim English as a prospect over not just these next few weeks, but for the rest of the season, and what we've seen differently in 2024 to potentially 2023.
Yeah, I can understand why people were very keen to get English a couple of weeks ago with that 3-round average of 135 by the looks. I guess when it comes to what I look for when I'm assessing the rucks, obviously rucks are going to score a lot of that points from stoppage situations with the hit outs, with the tackles. But what we do really see in AFL Fantasy more so than Supercoach is the most relevant rucks are the ones that can get involved around the ground. Like, we're not picking people like Jared Witts in AF because there's just not enough value from the hit outs. So if you just look at last year, these three rucks were the best in terms of not relying on stoppages for all their scoring. So it's no surprise to see them up so high again. The issue with English this year a little bit has been his variation has come from stoppage scoring, which is good from I guess it sets him apart because he's got that transition style scoring. And if you've ever watched him as a non-owner, which I was last year, he loves getting points off kick-ins. He just runs to the back pocket. So his transition scoring is fine. But yeah, over the last few weeks, the stoppage scoring has been the issue. He also had a 68, I think, in round 5, and he only did 14 points from stoppages. So the typical rucks are doing, if I just look at the top rucks this year, Cherry's doing 80 points from stoppages. He's comfortably the best. The rest of them are 65-ish. Marshall at 70. Marshall set the stoppage record that I have with 134 the week before against Meek. So for English, the issue is just a little bit, he doesn't quite have that same dominance that Marshall has, and even someone like Gawn has. He is fairly, I guess, reliant on the transition as a base, but then his variation comes at stoppage. So over the last 2 weeks, he's only done 46 and 44 from stoppage, which is a big flag right there. You don't want a ruck who has the most consistent role out of any player on the field to be doing that. And especially against GWS, that's a dream matchup based on what we've seen this year. So I guess that's the concern with English. You are relying on him to get a lot more outside ball than potentially what you might like. He's not quite having that same impact at stoppages. And that's where his big scores have come from. Like he's only done 60 plus a couple of times, and that's his big scores. And that's something that every single other ruck in the comp is doing. So that's where that average has come down from being the number one player in the game. He's no longer being able to be the number one, because last year he averaged 67 from stoppage, which is exactly this of what most rucks do this year. But this year he's down to just 56. So that's the 10-point drop off right there.
Yeah, that explains it. So Rids, then, for people, again, let's take Gawn out of the mix for a second, and the assumption is Marshall, if he goes anywhere 110 from here on in, he's going to be right in the mix. It does bring us to Tristan Cherry. If Marshall is firing ahead, Gawn has already gone for people that don't own him. It does feel like, okay, well, English is the guy, but is it worth getting off of a Tristan Cherry to an English type? I think we could argue it on current form. It has to be argued for Marshall, but could you argue that, Rids, that it's not worth the trade of Cherry off to an English type for those that are chasing the Gawn owners?
Yeah, I wouldn't be trading Cherry right now, only due to the fact that his matchup next week is against Port Adelaide. And then he has the bye. So if you're going to get off him, then really it's the R2 that you own that drives who you're going to go to. And there is a world where you want to own Cherry, so at least you've got that R in like 12 bye player playing through, because it could be English in round 14, it could 15, it could be Gawn in round 14, whoever it is, okay, unless you've got a Jackson or even a Sweet at R3 at this point in time, and he does break in and become best 22 again, and Sol Ruck, and Soldo doesn't come back. There's a lot of ifs there, yeah? You're not going to likely to have two playing rucks through round 14 and 15. Like, that's the problem we're going to have. So we're going to be having a best of 21 aspect, if this is what it looks like. Cherry is going to be very handy to get that extra score through the buys if you hold him and then pivot off him after round 15 when things are a little bit more clearer with English, with Marshall, with Gawn. But the problem we got, is it's going to be owners like yourself, MJ, that jumped off Marshall at, and I think it was probably about the same price tag now, but the problem is his break even now means he's going north, whereas at the time when you jumped off him, he was going south. So there's that.
It's plummeting.
Yeah, like that's the drama, because, you know, what is it? It's buy low, sell high in this game. Sorry, I nearly stuffed that up 3 times. But anyways, so how can we, in our right mind, knowing that, go, I'm going to jump off Marshall at a whatever it was, $1 million or whatever, because he's going to drop price, but I want to pay 1.5, 1 million, 1.1, you know? Like, how do we do that? And how do we make that a common sense? The only way we can do that is if we got completed teams. And when I say completed teams, no rookies on field out. And last week we discussed this, okay? I'm not including Jeremy Sharp as a rookie. So no rookies on field, because you don't want that volatile scorer at those points. But if your 22 on field is solid, that's when you go into luxury season and you can upgrade to get to the best of the best, if that makes sense, mate. So it's a really interesting dynamic, but it's a dilemma for coaches, because Marshall's going to have a buy after Cherry. So even if you want to go Cherry, and that's great. It's only 200,000 to do that jump. And that's an easy, rookie to rookie. And we've got a lot of rookies at the moment. Whether they're job security
Various fat ones,
strong or not, we can probably
Sure.
milk 200,000 from a Graham to a McAuliffe or Richards and probably get enough cash to go Cherry to Marshall.
Correct.
But what does that mean for your trades over the next 2 or 3 weeks? And then Marshall has the buy in round 15. And if you've already got English, you're a best 20 proposition, mate.
Yeah,
Or
it's
best
true.
18 from 20.
Jaiden, I'm curious.
But you get
I understand what you mean. So Jaiden, I'm curious. One of the things you do for people that follow on Twitter or X, if you don't do it, seriously, you need to go and do it. Again, some of the stats he's been doing in the community is great. You're always often sharing about your projected scores for the coming weeks. And there's one player that I think non-owners are targeting hardcore in 2 weeks' time as he comes off the bye. But there's a really interesting prospect this week, and I'm alluding to Tom Green. Just 5 weeks ago, I think he was $1 million man, and now all of a sudden he could be potentially, depending on what happens this week against Geelong, 770, 760, or right back over 800,000, depending on the variance that goes. Talk to me about, from a statistical perspective and a projection perspective, what could this matchup be for Tom Green this week? Because it breaks every intellectual rule that I'm only going to get him for a week and then he's on the bye. But is there something about what he could do this week that just might make it worthwhile?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it's not the sole reason, but I actually traded Tom Green in last week. I didn't quite get the reward that I was after, but with a lot of these things, I guess you're looking more at the next month rather than just one game. And if I have the chance to get him now, that's kind of why I did it. And I also had the Parish issue, which I managed to edit, which I'm very grateful for. I guess with Green, so there's a few boxes that tick instantly for me. Just looking at what I've got here for the matchup difficulty this week for stoppage points, Geelong are comfortably the best stoppage points matchup. And that's why I had Noah Anderson quite high in projections last week compared to everyone else. And Took as well. Rao was up there as well. So Geelong give up 75 points more as a team at stoppages compared to the league average. So as the Giants' best stoppage mid, you'd expect a fair few of those 75 points to go onto his average potentially. But yeah, like after running the projections, I've got him at number 1 this week so far, which has actually been a bit of a curse so far this year. They've gone pretty poorly if they're at number 1, so I'm not sure if they're reading it and thinking, oh, okay, I can put the feet up this week. I'll just get a score without trying. But I think, to be honest, I kind of forgot about Tom Green last week, and I had some good people in a group chat remind me that he existed, and he was 800k. So I'm pretty keen on this matchup. Like, it just seems ridiculous that he's there. And I'm an owner, but I guess if I was trying to recommend it to someone, like, do you want to, like, from my perspective, I was so happy to do it because I know everyone else is going to bring him in after that round 13. So why would you not get him for the best matchup in the game? I guess if he does a 140, like, everyone's going to be getting him anyway. But they're not getting that 140. So I think it's a good opportunity to know that everyone else will be trading into him next week. And something you guys talk about a lot is just being 1 week ahead of what everyone else is doing. So I think this is a really good opportunity for that when you know everyone is going to bring him in. And if your buy structure suits, like if you've traded out Sheezel last week, and you've also got maybe the Cherry issue that we've talked about, and maybe you're making the decision of, like, am I going it back into Fisher this week, or am I would I like to go for Tom Green with an amazing matchup compared to Zac Fisher against Port? So like, and there's only $80,000 between them. So like, that's the kind of decision you have to make. And if you trade into Fisher, why would you not trade back into Tom Green? Like, you've still got the same amount of players on the buy. So that's why I'm really keen on him.
So, and I know Rid's got some thoughts on this, but next week when we hit the bye, it's Brisbane, it's the Giants, it's North and Sydney. So based on popular teams, what they're navigating would be issues of on-field options missing. It will be Heaney and Cherry for the bulk majority of the community. Then it'll be a kind of a spattering of Fishers, of Gouldens, of Dunkleys and Zorkos, all kind of missing through there. So Rids, does a trading into Green, and there is another player under 800,000 I want to get your take on in a minute, Rids, that's in a similar line, and maybe not as big as a scorer legacy-wise, but a prospect. Does trading into Green this week really determine more about the round 12 players you have? Or are you like, I don't care, the matchup is so good, I want it? Or third option, nah, you can't trade into a bloke as good as the matchup is who's going to miss next week. Which of those three camps do you feel like you kind of land on?
No, well, it's very much, look, it's team dependent, this one. This one's 100% team dependent because you want to maximize your players on the field in your best 18, especially for round 12. And the reason why I say that is because teams will have Goulden, they will have Heaney, they will have a Tom Powell, they will have a Sheezel, they will have a Whitfield. There could be a Zorko, especially all the top teams. Like, that's going to be the big discussion point, okay? And I think Jaiden, I was actually unmuted because I was going to interrupt Jaiden and yourself at the time, but I was so intrigued in listening to what Jaiden was saying because this is what we talk about, okay? 1 week ahead of the game is sometimes in AF we are reactive. It's okay to be proactive, And we played Dream Team for years, MJ, and some people might think we go okay in that sort of format. The thing with Dream Team is that you can actually be proactive and take risks and jump off guys quickly. The problem with AF, with the two trades, use them or lose them every week, is you get punished for being unique and wrong. That's the main problem, okay?
Yes.
But the thing is, and the people that sometimes we make it too simple for ourselves, and then some other times we overcomplicate it. So look at Tom Green. Perfect discussion point this week. Has one of the best matchups for mids in the game. Has a break even. It's not exactly easy to hit, but I wouldn't say it's unattainable.
No.
It's like a Rowan Marshall discussion from 2 weeks ago. He had 130 break even, So I'm not predicting Tom Green
doable, but it'll take his best.
That fixture, would any of us be surprised if Tom Green pops a 140 this week? I don't think we would be.
Not at all. Not with the matchup.
And with that matchup, he's definitely a VC option this week. Okay. So that's the flip side as well. So with Tom Green, though, what does that open up to you in round 13 when those guys are coming back? Does it mean that you have the opportunity to go and get a Zorko? Does it mean you can go and get aggressive? Is there someone coming off the round 12 bye that's going to be good for us? And I'm just thinking back at last week, I mentioned that Nick Haynes. He came out and popped 115, 120 last week. He's actually, I think he was sub 600 at the time. He might present, if he gets another 115, I guarantee you we're talking about how do we fit Nick Haynes into this world. These are the sort of things we have to try and get a bit creative at times and trying to work out how it meshes with your team. But if you've got a Goulden and you've got a Zorko and you've got lots of dollars sitting on your bench in round 12, a Sheezel, a Whitfield, a Heaney, that's a lot of cash, mate. So you've got to manage it for your team. But I can tell you now, if you have the ability for Tom Green, I would even suggest
this week.
if Sexton and Fisher and everyone else's group thinks that this week, Tom Green should be right next door to them because of the matchup and what he presents to you at round 13 by not trading into Tom Green round 13. And I know there's a lot of unlucky owners that traded into him a few weeks ago when he had that injury. Sometimes you just got to grin and bear it and move on.
But no one predicted that.
I think it's also pretty relevant that that Sexton and Fisher both have pretty terrible matchups this week, and if that's where groupthink is going, you can see the headlines already that everyone's thinking, "Why did I do this?" They've scored a 50. Like, I'm not going to be that surprised if that happens. Like with that two matchups, like Carlton don't give up any transition points whatsoever, so Sexton, who relies on that a lot, that's why I'm so keen on the matchup. And like, I'm still going to probably get the other two because I have Green already. But if you're weighing up one or the other, like, I think, especially Fisher, like, they have the same buy. Like, why would you not do it?
And how many times have we seen it over the years, MJ? We see someone like a Sexton, that goes and pops 120, and we jump on him the week after, and then he goes 90 or 80, and then we get disappointed because we didn't get the 120. So at least with Sexton, he's got a very friendly buy for us. We can actually make a bit of cash and then jump off him at the buy when we get a bit more information. Whether that's even to a Zorko, who knows how this looks, in a few weeks' time. But that's definitely an option, So at least with Sexton, Fisher is the awkward conversation. And I've been really amused.
Well, let's talk about him now.
Yeah, let's do it. Because I've had
let's talk about him. Like, it's weird.
Yeah, so I've got a little bit of a wry grin on my face with Fisher. You won't be able to see me because my AI Red's avatar doesn't change his facial expressions. But the fact is, I just don't know how I feel about this. I don't know last week we were talking about Sheezel all week, as the main distributor. How are we going to jump off him because his role had changed? Even last week in the game, we saw one injury to Miller Bergman impacted everything with roles for North Melbourne. Miller Bergman, MJ, who wasn't even the best 22 any of the rounds before last week. Like, this is what we're getting to with North Melbourne. And we talked about that role, like, let's say, uncertainty, like in these lower teams.
Volatility, yes.
Yeah, so we talked about it, and I think Liam was 100% nails it, mate. There's going to be more of this for the lower teams, the Richmonds, the North Melbournes, like whoever else is there, maybe West Coast. Who knows who's in the bottom few teams? Yeah, but you just don't know. But that role is going to change, and it could change in-game, not just week to week. So Fisher, he was fine. He wasn't a great pick. I wouldn't say he was a slam dunk pick to start the year, but he was okay until he got that vest.
No, he was fine.
Yeah, he was fine. We weren't going to trade out of him. We weren't going to strongly suggest anyone to trade into him.
No.
But for some reason, and I know he's popped a nice score and he's had 3 weeks in a row in that role. So we've got a little bit of happiness about that. We've got a little bit of comfort about that. But we do have a Port Adelaide matchup this week leading into a bye. They're the sort of trades I amuse myself with a little bit. And he could come out and score 110 because that ball could be living in Port's forward line all day, If they have a bad day in front of goal, he might get 13, 15, 20 kickouts. Who knows what's going to happen here? But this is the one that I would like Jaiden to talk about with his direct correlation from kick-in points and how it all looks. But the other thing with Zac Fisher that I noticed with one of Jaiden's tweets through the week, his transition to stoppage point ratio was off the charts, MJ, last week. And that's the sort of discussion point. Like, I don't know how I can't see that happening again this week because it was just crazy. But Jaiden can talk to that.
Sure. I'll hand it over to you, JP, for some stat reflections on Zac for us.
Yeah, you read my mind because I pulled it all up before you even said that, Rids. But yeah, I ended up trading into Fisher last week with Parrish. Trading into him. I guess you are very correct about the Port Adelaide matchup. So this year, Port are 50 points harder than any other team for turnover points. So based on Fisher's, I can talk about Fisher's game last week. I guess it comes down to 110 points in transition. Like, he's never going to be able to get stoppage points really because unless there's D50 stoppages. But he did 77 on turnover and 33 on kick-in. 33 on kick-in's very good considering there was only 10 kick-ins, I think, Essendon gave up compared to like Lockie Whitfield, who did 54 off 16 kick-ins or whatever. So Fisher relied quite a bit on turnover points last week, 77. I'm pretty sure that's probably his highest for the year, comfortably. So that's what we wanted to see, I guess, without McKercher and even Sheezel for half the game. But Port are by a long way the hardest turnover team in the comp, whether that's just because they just go straight through and kick a goal. And we saw that late in the Hawthorn game. But they are moderately okay for kick-in points. Like, they are scoring well, Port. They're a top 8 team, so they should be scoring a lot. That's where it's going to come down to the moving parts of the roles that has been mentioned before. Like, how does McKercher's not going to play, so that's a tick. And then it depends what happens. Like, Bergman's out for 4 weeks. He was always going to have a bit of an effect back there because it's what he's done in the past. But the kick-in points are there, so you are right, Rids. If that's what you want, then there you go. But the thing that worries me is that turnover, which he relied on a lot last week. 77 of his points coming from that. It was back and forth a game. So if that doesn't happen, then he's pretty stuffed, and we couldn't see a 60 like you said.
So you think about it, MJ. Let's just put this into perspective, okay? He had 110 transition points. You think about the best forwards in the game, and there's 3 of them at the moment. Tell me what they're average in a week. This guy had 100.
So the 3 you're alluding to is Zorko, Heaney, Flanders.
Correct. This guy had 110, mate. That's what they're looking at. Like, this is ridiculous numbers. This is about a guy who's like 81 he's averaging, MJ. That's 30 points more in transition points to his average. It is ridiculous, okay, how big last week was. Now, whether that's an outlier or whether that's, what do you call correlation, because Sheezel moved into the midfield and there wasn't as many people to share the market share of back points too. And at one stage, we're going to have to get Rowan on here, and talk about market share as well. Because, it would be nice if we can get...
There's our one for the podcast.
Yeah, if we get JP and Rowan at the same time, that would be brilliant, yeah? That would be like anyone's statistical...
That is a stat off.
Yeah, this might sound terrible, but that's a statistical wet dream, yeah, come true. Like, that's how crazy that conversation would be, yeah? But the thing is, like, if you're trading into Fisher this week, don't go there expecting, like, if he does do it, happy days,
Last week's score.
Happy days. But it is big. Those numbers are huge. Now, whatever happens will happen.
Yeah, you've done some great unpacking of that. Sure.
But
the thing is, that's good. I think you've helped us.
There's going to be a direct correlation here. Sheezel. What's going to happen with Sheezel moving forward? What happened last week when Miller Bergman was injured? Like, who have North Melbourne got to inject in the back line to replace Miller Bergman? I'm 100% believe Clarkson, mate. He wants Sheezel, midfielder, mid forward. And that's great. We get that.
Yeah.
Okay. But are we reacting to roll too much in this instance? Because Harry Sheezel is a stud of a player anyway, yeah? He might actually be a 95 to 105 mid. And guess what, mate? That's going to be well and truly enough average to be a top 6 defender for the year. So, I mean, let's not go jump in at shadows
100%.
too much. Let's try and keep it a sound conversation. But I get it. I get the thought process, and I actually like it. And we'll go into bigger depths next week. But this week now is like maybe JP has some stats with Sheezel there. And maybe you can just tell us what happens. I think it was from about the last quarter and a half, was it not? Last week? I think it was last quarter.
Yeah, it was him. And it was also Tom Powell was the other one that had his role kind of moved around. So Bergman goes out, Sheezel goes back, Powell elevates in. So it is this interesting interplay link of North Melbourne's players and structures. Over to you, Jade.
Yeah, I guess so. The like 5/8 of the game Bergman playing. Sheezel did 42 at stoppage. So that's kind of what you're talking about, whether he can be a 95 mid. So that's very solid. 26 transition, not amazing, but not that bad for a mid. But then after that injury, halfway through, he did 2 stoppage points and 49 transition points. So 51 of his points came in that last third of the game, which is why he did so well. Like, it is a consideration, like, because I held Sheezel due to the Parish bigger issue, and like, is it a consideration now for me to still trade him out if we see the same kind of team selection? Like, Bergman came in last week, and that was obvious that Sheezel was not going to be playing back there. Are they going to bring in someone similar to that? Like, is he still a trade out? Because it is a little bit worrying that he scored so many points in that, I guess, last third of the game. But the 42 stoppage is all right. Like, I'm not massively worried. And I think, like, if you were going to do it from a cash perspective, then it would have been last week that you wanted to do it. So I'm not really sure whether I will be getting off him just yet. I'm probably at the moment, I'm more keen to get off Lockie Whitfield, to be honest, with the fixtures ahead and that same buy. So that's something I'm weighing up. I guess Sheezel can be that 95 kind of guy if he's doing that stoppage stuff, but North aren't a very good stoppage team, despite the massive amount of centre bounces they allow in their games because of all the goals. Yeah, like, Sheezel only did 14 points from centre bounce. I'm not sure what his attendance was, but like, if he only did, like, he's going to need that stoppage points. And I've talked about it in the past. Like, you can't just move into the midfield and score well. Like, you need to be that kind of dual position type player where you score well as a transition defender, which Sheezel definitely was. He was doing the 110s back there, 120s even. But then you also need to have that flexibility in your scoring. And I haven't actually run it this year, but I'll be keen to look at it soon. Just like whether he can convert his transition scoring into being a stoppage scorer and how that relates to his role. Because there's been players in the past that have gone into this midfield role and they haven't quite developed into that. Like, that stoppage scoring isn't outweighing the scoring they're losing in transition from being a defender. So that's something to consider.
Yeah.
So one thing that I saw on the weekend when I was watching North Melbourne, and I really tuned into North Melbourne, and I really tried to focus on Sheezel, okay? Because I'm in the same camp. I held him last week. I wanted to see what do I want to see to get off him, yeah? Unfortunately, he didn't answer any of those questions. But what I did see was he was burnt 20 times, I reckon. And 10 of them were probably by LDU. LDU wants to beat everyone when he gets the ball and not share it around with his teammates. And that's cool, yeah, because every team has one. But he did really burn Sheezel many times. There was also an incident in the first quarter where it could have been a hold in the ball and Sheezel kicked the goal, but it was paid a free kick for in the back. Whether it was and wasn't, it doesn't really matter. But that's a 17-point turnaround just there. Because if that was paid holding the ball,
correct.
and then he got the goal, that's 14 points, but instead he got a -2. Now, it's interesting because those little swings that we sort of over, like if you're not watching the game, you do miss it at times. They do become, like how many times have we seen a put in the back or too high from a tackle that was a decent tackle that should have been holding the ball, or someone drop it and then suddenly it's a free kick for holding the man. Like we see it all the time when we're watching the games.
7-point
That's
swings
11.
very easily.
Well, 11-point swing, mate. Like, holding the ball, which is 8, if you have a kick afterwards, compared to a -3, and they happen all the time. So there's interesting ones. But what I wanted to see from Sheezel is I knew his transition points were good, yeah? And so Jaiden's done a brilliant job here. What I wanted to see was the ability to go 40 to 50, 45 to 55, with stoppage points. Because we know if North Melbourne are on song and use the ball well and use him, and I'm sure this is an escape in the coaches' visions when they do reviews and everything else. If they do that and they use the ball better, his transition points will go skyrocketing very quickly. It's the stoppage points. I was the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. If I could see him getting those 40, 45s, that gives me some sort of solace that all he has to do is match that in the transition points, and it might be 5 minutes behind the ball a quarter. And he's got the ability to do that in spades in a game of football. That's a 90 average just there. If it's a 50-50 split, that's a 100 average right there. That's what we're looking for, true. Because Jaiden just said it then. His transition points were through the roof with the right role in a quarter and a half. It's like we know this. We've seen him do it since round 1, yeah?
Yeah, no, we have. In a minute, I'm keen to get Jaiden from a statistical perspective, and then Rids just from a pure football perspective. I want to get your boys' thoughts around Jack Steele. There's a likely incumbent to that midfield unit in Brad Crouch coming this week, back from injury, dominated the VFL. In a minute, I want to get your boys' thoughts around him. But before that, I got to rewind the clock a little bit. This time a week ago, there was a player that was low 700,000s. That was the, many would say, must-have, but an absolute no-brainer pick in Clayton Oliver, a guy that's got legacy of 100-plus scoring, was, relatively speaking, through a heavy tag. I think owners would be pretty happy with what he gave them, given what they paid for him. But there's a player that was in a comparable price point this week that is not getting anywhere near the love. Granted, he doesn't have the scoring legacy of Clayton Oliver over a period of time, but last year scored like a premium for us in our defensive line, is mid only this year, and has just come back from an injury. Rids, talk to me about Will Day, because at 724,000, I know the break even of 84 doesn't excite incredible cash generation, but is he need to be viewed the same way we were viewing Clayton Oliver last week, but for this week?
I think so. I really do, because it's the same sort of story, yeah? We know his start to the season hasn't been ideal. He's coming off injury, he's had a little bit of a lack of momentum. He took a couple of games to really build his fitness up a bit. But what I saw on the weekend against one of the hardest inside mid matchups in Port Adelaide, he was back to Will Day doing dancing. That goal he kicked in the second quarter, I think it was just incredible, yeah? If that's not one of
Stunning.
the goals of the year, I don't know what is. But the fact is, he was everything. And of course, he's going to run out of legs in the last quarter. I know people are going to say he faded late. That's fair. But he hasn't had a preseason, or he's had a really interrupted season. He's going to build from that performance, yeah? So and in those conditions with the rain and the slog and such a tough matchup, and I know that Ollie Wines went off, early, but it's still a tough matchup because there's the William Drews
It's
there.
tough matchup regardless.
We've got Butters. We've got all the others.
Boak, Butters, Horn Francis.
720,000, mate. Like, that's ridiculous price, yeah?
Mhm.
And this guy, he's a 95 mid, I reckon minimum, all day, really. All will day, that is. But this guy is a gun. And he's a great guy to own. We all were on that journey a little bit last year. We know what he's like, and we saw a different Hawthorn with a functioning Will Day in the first 3 quarters. It's just a different chalk and cheese matchup.
Well, and at the very least, you can look to move him at that round 15 bye. And there's some matchups that are interesting enough through there. So they've got Brisbane this week at Marvel, the Crows at the MCG, University of Tasmania. They've got the Giants, and then a favourable matchup, albeit with some cavalry starting to come back for Richmond, but a Richmond matchup that has been great scoring prospects
Hawthorn
through
play
the midfield
Richmond
in round 14. So
twice between now and the end of the year, MJ. So if Richmond
they
do go for that number 1 pick and
North Melbourne in round 24.
Yeah, there's a lot of this guy has been surprisingly talked down this week. I've heard a few pods. He's
not talked down, not spoken about.
Well, I've
at
heard
all.
a few times that we've heard his name mentioned, but I think it's almost we just haven't given it enough thought. And this is what happens in groupthink at times. It's like, one person's point of view becomes the next, especially when there's so much content out there. But this guy's game last week, I would go on the app and have a look at the highlights because he's back to being Will Day off last year.
I agree. I think it's a really good shout. We're nearing the hour portion of our podcast. There's still a couple more players I want to get your thoughts on, but I don't want to rush past Zac Steele, who I alluded to. Been a great starting squad selection. I know there was some concern about whether or not he could get that scoring split back up again, but undoubtedly a great starting squad selection. But I'm curious, Jaiden, barring a shock, I've been wrong. I thought Luke Parker was coming back, and now he's not coming back for another almost 2 months into the Sydney team due to suspension in the VFL. But Brad Crouch had a really great game in the VFL. He's missed almost the majority of the year, played round 1, got dropped due to some things that weren't quite right, and then been injured since that point in time. I think in St Kilda's best side, he's clearly a central piece of that midfield. Does a Brad Crouch and the way he scores, could and will that impact what we see from Steele, who, while he's been scoring okay over the past couple of weeks, there have been some, it feels like there's a few paper cracks just starting to emerge in some of his scoring. Does a Brad Crouch coming back in based off 23 data at very least impact what we could expect from a scoring for Zac Steele moving forward?
Yeah, I do think so. If we look at, I guess, last year when they played together, Steele was obviously a little bit under the weather with his body, but Crouch outdid him in both stoppage and transition scoring. So it gives you a good indication of, I guess, we think of Zac Steele as one of the best tacklers, one of the best inside mids in the comp. Brad Crouch outdid him last year. That was 51 points per game, and still did 49. So that's the area that has a little bit of concern for me, because the way I treat stoppage and transition stuff based on my research into it and coming up with kind of the definitions of it from a fantasy perspective, the stoppage scoring is related to role, and then the transition scoring is more to do with the type of player they are, and whether sometimes to do with the matchup as well. But in general, if you adjust for the matchup, it's more to do with the type of player. So like last year, we saw Errol Goulden just absolutely dominate the wing and transition. Like that's just to do with the player. That's not to do with the role. But with someone like Jack Steele, he's got the role all the time, and his stoppage scoring has been fairly consistent this year. Like even on the weekend, he had a 77, but he still did 54 from stoppage, which is, I think, not that far away from his season average. His season average is 56. So like that's his consistent. That's his role, and then the transition stuff varies per game. Brad Crouch is the only player in that team that's going to affect his stoppage stuff. So that's where it comes down to it for me. A little bit worried about how they affect each other at stoppage because Steele's variation comes from transition. So he still might have some okay scores if his stoppage stuff goes down to back what it was last year, which was 50 or 49. Yeah. And then this year he's doing 56. That's the complete difference in his scoring output this year compared to last year when he was struggling. That's the complete difference. So is Crouch coming in going to be that? Is that going to be the issue, or was it more to do with the injury last year? I think the fact that the Saints have no one else that's doing above 40 at stoppage is probably going to do a little bit there. And also another fact that helps Marshall a lot is the fact that the last 3 weeks, the Saints have had 105 stoppages or more every single game, which is ridiculous because they only average about 90 for the season. So that's like a massive, it's just like we see it down in Launceston all the time. But yeah, that's something I'm a little bit worried about as well. Is he only doing the stoppage stuff because of the high stoppage recently, which helped him get back to decent scores? But then we're going to see his second fiddle come in and do a very similar role. There's only going to be so many points around those stoppages, especially if the total number of stoppages comes down.
Yeah.
And the other guy is Windhager, who's now moved to an inside midfielder role. Yeah. So if I call out Windhager, Crouch, Steele, there's a sameness, isn't there, in those three? There's one guy that made his debut for the club last week who provides a little bit of burst from stoppage, and that's Paddy Dow. So how this all works in a team that's been very underwhelming this year, there is potential, okay? Now, we keep thinking of Jack Steele remembering the first few games, yeah? Like, we're thinking he's been great, he's everything else. He's only averaging 107, MJ. So, like, this is, like, and I say only 107, but that's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. Because
tongue-in-cheek,
I think he's been an awesome starting pick. There's no question about that, yeah?
Agree.
But since, I think it was, what was it, sorry? Let me just quickly double check. The last 5 or 6 rounds has been very underwhelming. Like, there was been one
in contrast
or two
to the start of the year.
Yeah. Because you think about it, since round 6 against the Bulldogs, he's gone 87, 72, 100, 137, 137 against Hawthorn. Again, high stoppage game. He's the only one in there eating that market share of the pie himself at that game. And then you look at Fremantle.
Yeah.
Brad Crouch has to impact Jack Steele. Has to. So what does that mean? I have no idea, because we're already seeing only 3 weeks ago a massive bandage on Jack Steele's knee. We've got history last year of Jack Steele have carrying that injury through the year and impacting him. Like, we need to be having a bigger conversation about this guy.
I think so. Well, he's gone 93 over his last 5.
But I just want to highlight something, MJ. last week, I get it, okay? We all play the break-even game, rightio. I get it. Harry Sheezel's break-even last week was 166. But have we missed some obvious signs of other guys? And I know sometimes it papers over the cracks. Steele did that 131 against Hawthorn 2 weeks ago. Well, I know Bontempelli went 120-something last week against Richmond. There is times when that matchup is very favourable and all of the stars align and there's high stoppages or the grounds come in or the weather impacts it. Like, there are times when these guys actually come out and, have those pop scores, but are they the same guy as what they were last year or at the start of the year? And they're the ones that we got to be really cautious on, because sometimes if we're only looking at stats and scores, we miss some of the obvious signs, yeah?
Yeah, it's true. I want to talk about some forwards in a second, but while you brought up on, I think it's worth mentioning, last week's score was the worst AFL fantasy score he's had since the COVID-affected season of 2020. So that's how far off and how well he got tagged this week. But regardless of that, he's nowhere near the 115 plus guy that he was last year. It feels like he's returned to normal, for sake of a better phrase. And his Supercoach scoring, while we're not talking about Supercoach on this episode, he's back around that high 1 teens. And now it feels like, with the exception of this heavily tagged, lowest score in probably 50, 60 games of football, maybe more, he's back to this 100, 105 guy. Is it worth even going anywhere near him? Or, as you've said, Rids, is a couple of fixtures just protecting what's been a good season in a football sense, but certainly nowhere near from an AFL fantasy sense, why people thought he was the safest option of all our top-end premium mids?
We had 2 rounds in a row, okay, where he sat on the bench in the last quarter where the game was in the balance, and he sat on the bench for 7 or 8 minutes of the last quarter. If you told me that last year...
the ball just got stuck on the other wing and he couldn't get there.
Yeah, but we make up stuff at times, yeah? We go, oh, yeah, the ball was on the other side. There's still opportunities to roll someone on and off, and you could still be standing on the sidelines, cheering someone, waving your hands, trying to get on. I saw shots in those 2 weeks of him just sitting on the bench. Like, I think one of them, he was drinking a drink. He was like, this guy is playing injured. I think we all know that. I don't think the club is going to be transparent to tell people that. But what does that mean? Does that mean he's going to be full hell and going at it in the midfield for the whole game, or are they going to start looking at protecting him by pushing him in forward and sitting him on longer rotations on the bench, starting games in different positions to where they are? They're the things we got to watch, because they're missing the number 1 clearance guy for the team right now in Tom Liberatore. Like, there is no common sense approach to Bontempelli not playing in the midfield right now all the time, especially when the game's on the line. So they're the things we have to really keep in the forefront of our minds. Is he a good buy-in? Yes, because of his price tag. Could he go 110? Of course he could. But everything has to align. And having a Callan Ward sitting in your back pocket for the whole game does not help. You know?
Does not help.
So, but he's such an interesting conversation point, Marcus Bontempelli, because there's something not right. Yeah, we've been saying it all year. Owners have been saying he's been up, he's been down. It's not the same Bont. Like, I bought into him a couple of weeks ago in AF. Then I see last week, last year when he was getting tagged, mate, he was fighting, through those tags. Last week was sort of like he just went, okay, fair enough. and succumb to it. And there was time.
Well, he went forward to try to break that tag, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, are we making a narrative that wasn't relayed to us from coach, or was it just something we believed that was happening because we've seen it over the course of time? We don't know, and we may never know. Yeah. But how many times at the end of this season, Jack Steele, remember last year? Oh, yeah, I was underdone. I was carrying an injury, the knee. Andrew Brayshaw, Rory Laird. How many examples do we have to say? Like, I don't know why there's no transparency on injuries, because really, you're not much more tougher for playing through it. Like, just be honest. Like, and at least then the media is not on your case to say, oh, yeah, he's out of form. He's not doing the right thing by his team. But the thing is, Bulldogs are winning, mate. So it's just weird, yeah? The Bulldogs is just weird all round.
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe that's a nice way to almost wrap up our podcast. And Jaiden, talk to me a little bit about Jackson Macrae, because I think there's this weird stigma around him still. We spent a lot of time in the preseason, you and I, talking about him. We did, I think, a 30-odd minute deep dive on him and the 50 most relevant during the preseason. So you can go and check that out. You beautifully helped us understand in that episode that Macrae's scoring and a linkage to centre bounce attendance are not true. It's his transition scoring is where he really comes to the fore. He's been an absolute bargain for us this year. And yet we sit at a guy that we make those statements. Yes, there's a sub-effect in that, but not averaging 80, break even of 102, under 800,000. And there is a level of not lament, but a little bit of frustration for owners in the AFL fantasy community. It's like, this wasn't worth trading into him 2 or 3 weeks ago, outside of that 1 or 2 nice matches almost a month ago now. Did we have faulty expectations on Macrae? Or is it that we just need to reevaluate what we should be expecting from him and our forwards in general?
Yeah, I lean towards the latter, and that's something that I was very open about in preseason on our episode, because you're not going to see the same player that we've seen the last decade when he's consistently dropped off in the transition scoring. So I guess it does come down to expectation, and I did trade into him, which I never thought I'd be doing, because I was never going to start him. I didn't want a piece of him at all because of the way that his scoring is gone. It wouldn't have even mattered if he was playing full mid, because, like, sure, like, but at his price, no, definitely. But I did end up getting him a few weeks ago, and part of that was Rids saying to me that he's the easiest trade-in we've ever seen, which is fair enough, because he does actually have the round 15 buyer. And I've seen a lot of people weighing up like, oh, if only I went to Zorko instead, if only I did this. Well, that buy is still next week. So I think it's been a fine play. Like, you're still getting a fairly consistent scorer. Like, he's not, I mean, it's not amazing, but it's just perfectly fine. And something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is, like, if I'm making all these moves around my buy structure, why am I assessing how well the move went before the buys have even started? So I think it comes down to a lot about the expectation. He was never going to be this guy that he's always been, and that's why I was so against starting him all year, even before the hammy. But people just need to understand that he's not getting the same amount of outside ball. Like, he used to be a 105 guy 10 years ago off no CBAs at all. Like, he used to do that. And he just because he can't do it now, don't blame the coach. Stop going on about Bevo, all these things. It's just the nature of his career development. Like, he's on the way down, but his stoppage scoring has been decent. Like, he's done 36 for the year. It's a decent floor.
Solid for him.
So, like, I just think people need to assess their expectations for him. Like, you need to have a good, and I guess it comes down to your trade reasoning and things like that. Like, I've traded him in for the buy, for the round 15 buy. Like, that's that's the reason you've got him. Don't be annoyed if Zorko's out here doing 140 when you made that decision based off your buy. So things like that, you need to have your expectation aligned with, I guess, what you've seen, and that comes back to me as well, like with projecting scores and stuff like that. If you have your expectations set, then you can't really be disappointed if things go a different way, or like it's just all about, I guess, what you want to expect from Macrae, and then just get him through to the buy and then trade him off to whoever you want. That's my goal.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about this, MJ,
Ritz?
is in his last 5, he's going at 89. And I know that there's 120 score in that, but we still can't discount that, okay?
Sure.
At the time when people bought into him, he was like 70s, priced at 65, 70 or whatever it was. We didn't buy into him at 900,000. There's a reason why we bought into him at the time, because it was an easy jump from a bench rookie to a Macrae type thing. But I really do think the expectations need to change a little bit. And I think one of the things I said to Jaiden when we were chatting about a few weeks ago was just manage your expectations. You know, if you think he's going to average 85, then it's a good pick if he's priced at 70, because that's 15 more than what he was priced at. That's actually 15 points of value.
Yeah.
So if that's what you're going to get out of it, then that's great. If not, okay, that's fine. We're still going to manage the buys. We're still going to jump off him at round 15. He was an easy buy at that point in time. But what happened was
2 weeks ago,
you think about it, mate. Kennedy's had a sub. We've had Baker, who was a very big discussion point, now missing a few games. We've had guys like Jake Waterman in the last 5. He's going great, mate.
Where does that come from?
But can we really trade into a guy that's got concussion issues like just only a week ago and missed a game? Like Brian Myers, was there any value around that sort of buy-in? Like, do we want to spend $1.5 million, like over $1 million on a 35-year-old with soft tissue injury history with the first buy? I know that we're going to have to at some stage, but do we really want to do that in the first part of the season and break our trade cadence as we move forward? And that's the battle, It's that really the risk versus the reward. Like, what does it look like for the next 2 or 3 weeks? But Jackson Macrae has done his job. But guess what? If you want to trade out of him, fine. That's no worries. Just make sure you trade into a guy who's already had his buy. So you've got that extra score potential in your best 18 for that person you're trading into's buy. Just be aware of what you're doing and make sure that you're going to try and manage your team, that you can actually make 3 or 4 extra trades and upgrades later after doing that.
Yes. No, that's some good advice. Hey, we're going to wrap up the episode in just a second. Before we do, we've got to check in on the AFL Fantasy Content Creators Cup. We're a part of that with a bunch of some of your favorite AFL Fantasy podcast and video episode makers. If you want to know how it all went down for some of the coaches panel last week, well, Rids is back on the winners board again, and I'm glad you are, because you talked a big game last week that you'd be able to take Hef of the Keeper League podcast, and you definitely got him done by a couple hundred points. So thank you, Rowan Marshall, for getting you through that one. That's handy when you've got the VC on him, mate.
But
so
also,
nice work there.
Just with Hef, I want to give a call out here, because Hef was one of those coaches that unfortunately wasn't able to edit their trade with Parish News due to DPP being used in the trade. It's just unlucky, and he ended up getting a Jai Clark on for Parish, and he missed Sheezel, who he would have fixed, obviously.
That's
awful.
That's 100 points right there.
So I only talked it up last week because it was a bit of banter, a bit of fun. But the fact of the matter is,
dude. He loves that stuff.
But the fact of the matter is, you can't control that. That's just yuck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Other coaches panel members, Mini Monk unfortunately went down to Jeppers Juniors. I just got Harmy at the Pod, and Louis unfortunately lost out to Destroy from the Traders. But Mini Monk is repping us nicely in the top 8 with Rids just knocking on the door. He's one win away from really jagging his way into the top 8. And me and Louis are, right, just holding up everybody nicely on the ladder as well. So if you want to find out more about their Content Creators Cup and the great work the AFL Fantasy Fanatics are doing, well, it's all thanks very, very simply to our friends, not only just at the AFL Fantasy Fanatics, but also at Infinite Wealth. They help you make smarter financial decisions, and they're giving you as an AFL Fantasy listener to this podcast a free gift. It's valued at almost $3,000, and it's available for you. Head to infinitewealth.com.au/AFL Fantasy, or you can click the link in this episode description. It's got everything you need there. They're giving away a great prize to some charities for the coach that comes out number 1 overall, and they're giving you a chance to make some great financial aims and goals for you as well. So make sure you check that out. What the team there with Bales and Guesty are doing there is some great work. Hey, Jaiden, 2 weeks in a row we've had you. 1 week on the Supercoach Strategy Roundtable, this week again on AFL Fantasy, mate. We're making you part of regular of the coaches panel community. Thank you once again for jumping on this podcast, my friend.
No worries at all. And I think I've got a bit more clarity over my own decisions, which is good. And that's always good, I think.
And let's give...
It's always nice when you talk yourself into it.
MJ, let's give Jaiden's website a bit of a spiel, yeah?
I was about to ask him. Stats by Jaiden is the website. One of the best research tools going around for you for AFL Fantasy and for Supercoach. We've also put the links for that and his own personal Twitter account where you can get in touch with him. Make sure you use that resource. It is alongside Daily Fantasy Australia, like the 2 go-to research places for me every single week. So make sure you go and give them not only a good couple of clicks, but go and kick him a coffee as well for the great work he's doing in the community. Totally agree with you on that, Rids. And you, mate, as always, in fine form, not just in an AFL fantasy rankings perspective, but just helping us dive through some big decision issues. As always, Rids, appreciate it, mate.
And just a shout out, mate, I've got a couple of friends coming along next week.
Oh, he's back to bringing friends. Okay. I have caught wind of this. Next week's AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtable might be one of my favorites that I'm looking forward to, with not just the quality of guests you've got coming, but already what you put on the table for some conversations and what I know those great coaches are going to bring to the table. Yeah, you don't want to miss it next week at all, mate.
Yeah, so it should be fun.
I'm looking forward to that. If you have been enjoying what you've been getting from the coaches panel right throughout the season and the preseason, well, there's a couple of ways you can get involved. It's just small, simple thank yous. You can make sure if you watch these episodes on YouTube, click subscribe, turn the notifications on. And if you are watching, I'd love to know what your AFL fantasy trades are this week. You can comment below. Let us know. I'd love to see the moves that you're making. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you haven't subscribed or given it a 5-star rating yet, the good news is it takes just 3 seconds to do those 2 things. Simple and easy and greatly appreciated. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating and you can write up a review. If you do that this week, I will read it out on next week's podcast. So if you want a bit of a shout out, you got a week, my friends. Put that 5-star rating in your little review and I will read it out for you next week. And then, of course, our loyal and incredible Patreons get some amazing content. Well, not just week round, but daily connections with members of the coaches panel. They can get up to 4 podcasts a week from us, Q&As, round reviews, a bunch of other exclusive content from as little as $2 right up to the $10. There is a bunch of different tiers. There is one I guarantee that is right for you. If you want to join the Patreon Coaches Panel Army, all the details for that, Jaiden's website, taking the for granted, the Infinite Wealth link and everything else you need are in the description of this episode. Good luck heading into round 11. We hope it is kind for you. I hope your rookie roulette of the last few you've got left on field work out nicely. Your VC early in the week pops, so you don't have to worry about the captain. And I can't wait to be chatting with you next week as we talk about AFL fantasy during the middle of the buys.